There are moments in life that feel small when they happen. A comment made in passing. A laugh shared at someone else's expense. A room full of people who say nothing. Those moments don't feel like turning points. They feel like Tuesday. But sometimes Tuesday is the day a person decides, quietly, without drama, without a single raised voice, that enough is enough. And sometimes the person who laughed the loudest is the one who never sees it coming. This is a true story. It happened in a United States military base, in a room full of soldiers, in front of witnesses. It started with a sergeant who thought he was untouchable. It ended with a woman who proved he wasn't. And the weapon she used wasn't a complaint form, wasn't a lawyer, wasn't a press release. It was one sentence, 11 words, spoken in the right room, at the right time, to the right person. She didn't plan it. She didn't rehearse it. She just told the truth. And that was enough to end his career. Her name was Specialist Diana Reyes, 26 years old, 5 feet 4 inches of quiet determination wrapped in a uniform she had earned twice over. Once with her score at basic training, and once every single day she showed up to a base where people like her were still considered a novelty. A woman, a Latina, the daughter of a mechanic from San Antonio who had told her when she was 9 years old that the world would underestimate her, and that she should let it because underestimated people are the most dangerous kind. She took that advice seriously. Diana had enlisted at 22, right after finishing 2 years of community college and deciding that she wasn't ready to sit still in a classroom for another 2 years while her family scraped by. Her older brother was already in. Her uncle had done 3 tours. Service was not a foreign concept in her house. It was the wallpaper. It was background noise at dinner. It was the thing the men in her family did, which was exactly why she decided she would do it too, just to see the look on their faces. They were proud. She was surprised by that. She'd expected pushback. Instead, her father stood at her graduation from basic training and cried in a way she had never seen him cry before, silently, facing forward, like he didn't want anyone to catch him at it. She had been stationed at Fort Cavazos for 14 months when Sergeant First Class Leonard Briggs was assigned to her unit. He arrived the way certain men arrive, loudly, taking up space that hadn't been offered to him, shaking hands too firmly, laughing at his own jokes before he finished telling them. He was 41 years old, career military, and had the particular kind of confidence that comes not from competence but from never having been seriously challenged. He had navigated 17 years of service on charm and volume and a very well-maintained ability to read rooms and identify who he needed to impress. He sized Diana up in about 4 seconds. She saw him do it. She had learned, by that point, to track that specific look, the one that moves across a person's face when they've already decided what you are before you've spoken a single word. The assessment that isn't really an assessment, because the conclusion was reached before the data was gathered. She'd seen it on drill instructors, on fellow soldiers, on officers at briefings who spoke slightly past her rather than to her. She knew the look. She had a whole internal filing system for the men who gave it. Briggs out his own folder. The first few weeks were fine, in the way that fine is its own kind of warning. He was professional in official capacities, in unofficial ones. Hallways, the break room, the edges of PT sessions, he was something else. A comment here, a joke there, the kind of humor that has a target and then laughs and says it was just a joke when the target doesn't laugh back. He called her Reyes, in the same tone most people use for a word they've decided is a punchline. He would pause slightly before saying her name in briefings, a half-beat delay that was almost nothing, that nobody else seemed to notice, that made her feel like she was being introduced as a curiosity rather than addressed as a soldier. She noticed. She always noticed. She did not react. This was deliberate, and it cost her something every time, that deliberate non-reaction, that practiced stillness. Her mother had another piece of advice she'd given her at 13, when a teacher had publicly humiliated her for answering a question the teacher hadn't expected her to answer correctly. Don't let people know how much they've landed. Diana had carried that one too. She was good at it by now. Too good, maybe. She had become so skilled at absorbing impact, without showing it, that people sometimes confused her stillness for indifference, or worse, for agreement. Briggs confused it for submission. That was his first mistake. The incident that started everything happened on a Thursday morning in November. Diana's unit was in the middle of a leadership development rotation, a 6-week program designed to give lower enlisted soldiers hands-on experience in team leadership roles. Each week, a different soldier was designated as a temporary squad leader and given responsibility for planning and executing a training scenario. It was taken seriously. It was evaluated. The evaluations went in your file. Diana's week was week 4. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for most things. Thoroughly, quietly, with no announcement. She had spent the 2 weeks prior studying the scenarios from weeks 1, 2, and 3, taking notes, identifying where the previous temporary leaders had struggled, building contingencies for those specific failure points. She had a plan, a backup plan, and a backup to the backup. Her scenario involved a simulated communications blackout during a convoy exercise, and she had designed a decision tree for her squad that covered 11 separate variables. She showed up Thursday morning with a briefing that was, by any objective measure, better than anything the unit had seen in that rotation so far. She knew it was good. She didn't say so. She just ran it. The exercise went well. Her squad executed cleanly. 2 unexpected variables came up: a simulated vehicle breakdown and a change in the mock threat assessment midway through, and her team handled both because she had planned for both. When the exercise wrapped, the evaluating officer, Lieutenant Colonel Maris, had a quiet, approving look on his face that Diana cataloged and filed away for later. Then, Sergeant Briggs opened his mouth. He was standing at the edge of the debrief circle, arms crossed, in that particular posture that men who feel overshadowed sometimes adopt, the one that is trying to look relaxed but is actually trying to look unimpressed. He waited until the formal debrief was nearly done. He waited until Diana had received a brief, clipped acknowledgement from Lieutenant Colonel Maris. He waited, she would think later, for the exact moment when it would land hardest. Then he laughed. It was a short sound, almost a breath, but it carried. "Not bad for a first try," he said. "Might want to work on keeping your voice down during direction calls, though." Some of us had trouble hearing if it was a soldier or a... He paused, and the pause was the whole thing. The pause was the blade. A mom at a school pickup line. A few people laughed. Nervous laughs, the kind that happen in a room where someone has done something that everyone knows is wrong, but nobody wants to be the one to say so first. Most people looked at the ground. One soldier looked at Diana with something close to apology in his eyes. Diana did not look at the ground. She looked directly at Briggs. Her face did not change. Inside, something shifted, not into rage, not into humiliation, but into something cooler and more deliberate than either of those things. Something that felt, if she was honest, almost like relief. Like she had been waiting for the thing she'd been sensing since week 1 to finally show itself clearly, and now it had, and now she knew exactly what she was dealing with. Lieutenant Colonel Maris had gone very still. Diana noted that too. She said nothing. Not then. She gathered her materials, finished the debrief, thanked her squad, and walked off the field with the same, even pace she'd walked onto it with. Briggs watched her go with the look of a man who had won something. He had not won anything. He had, without knowing it, handed her everything she needed. He had done it in front of a lieutenant colonel who had just watched Diana run one of the sharpest exercises of the rotation. And he had done it in front of 12 witnesses. And he had done it loudly enough that there was no question about what had been said or who had said it. Diana walked back to the barracks. She sat down on her bunk. She thought about her father at her graduation, facing forward, crying silently. She thought about what he had told her when she was 9. She thought about Tuesday and how Tuesdays sometimes become the day everything changes. Then she took out her notebook and she started to write. Not a complaint, not a report, not anything formal. Just notes, dates, times, specific words, specific witnesses. A record of every single moment over the past 14 months that she had filed away in that internal folder with Briggs's name on it. Everything she had watched and absorbed and refused to react to. Everything she had let land without showing that it landed. She wrote for 2 hours. She filled 11 pages. When she was done, she looked at what she had written. It was detailed. It was specific. She realized the case. Not because she had built it deliberately, because she had been living inside it for over a year and she had paid attention. She closed the notebook. She did not go to HR. She did not call a lawyer. She did not talk to anyone in her chain of command that night. She went to sleep because she had learned something else from her father, the thing that came before the advice about being underestimated. Asterisk, don't move when you're angry. Move when you're clear. Asterisk, she was clear by morning. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a person who has decided something. It is not the silence of a person who has given up. It is not the silence of a person who is afraid. It is the silence of someone who has already finished the conversation in their head and is simply waiting for reality to catch up. Diana Reyes moved through the next several days in exactly that silence. Calm, present, performing every function of her role with the same clean precision she always had. Watching, waiting, not for a moment of anger because the anger had already done its work and gone. Waiting for the right door. She didn't have to wait long. 2 days after the exercise, Lieutenant Colonel Maris called a routine unit check-in. A 30-minute meeting, standard format, attendance required for all NCOs and above. Diana was not required to attend. She was a specialist. She was not in that room, but she had spoken briefly with Staff Sergeant Okafor the morning of the meeting, and he had mentioned in passing that the lieutenant colonel had asked the unit leadership to flag any morale or conduct concerns from the recent rotation before the next training cycle began. Diana heard that. She filed it. She did not request a meeting. She did not draft a formal complaint. She did not consult the Equal Opportunity Office, not yet. Not first. What she did was something that required more nerve than any of those options, because all of those options put her request through a system, and systems create distance, and distance lets people manage things quietly, and she did not want this managed quietly. She walked up to Lieutenant Colonel Maris after the check-in as he was leaving the briefing room, while a handful of other people were still within earshot, and she said, "Sir, I'd like 5 minutes of your time when you have it. I have something I need to report, and I want to do it correctly." Maris looked at her. He said, "My office. 15 minutes. That was it. No drama. No foreshadowing. Just a door opening." She was in his office in 14 minutes. He was already there. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and she sat in it with her back straight and her notebook in her lap, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her during the debrief, that same quiet, measuring attention. And he said, "What do you have?" Diana opened her notebook. She didn't read from it. She knew it well enough to speak from it. She went through 14 months in 11 minutes. Not emotionally, not with complaint in her voice, but with the flat specificity of a soldier delivering an intelligence report. Dates, incidents, direct quotes, witnesses. She noted every time Briggs had made a comment, every delayed pause before her name, every piece of humor that had a target, every moment in which the target had been her gender, her appearance, her ethnicity, her voice. She noted which incidents had witnesses and who those witnesses were. She noted the school pickup line comment last, and she noted that it had occurred directly following what the evaluating officer had indicated was a high-performing exercise in front of 12 named soldiers within earshot of Maris himself. Then she stopped talking. Maris had not interrupted her once. He sat with his hands flat on the desk, and he looked at her notebook, and then he looked at her, and he said, "How long have you been keeping these notes?" She said, "Since week 2 of his assignment to the unit, sir." He said, "Why didn't you bring this forward earlier?" She looked at him steadily. She said, "I wanted to be sure." There was a pause, not an uncomfortable one, a thinking one. He said, "Leave a copy of those notes with my adjutant. I'll need you to make yourself available for a formal EO inquiry." "Can you do that?" She said, "Yes, sir." She left the copy. She left the office. She walked back across the base in the same even pace she always moved with, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not relief, not satisfaction, but something quieter than all of those. The feeling of having done the thing correctly. The feeling of having aimed with both hands and let go clean. She did not tell anyone what she had done. Not her friends in the unit. Not her brother, who would have wanted details. Not even Staff Sergeant Okafor, who had become something close to a mentor over the past year, and who she trusted more than most people on the base. She said nothing because she understood, with the instinct of someone who had been watching power dynamics her entire adult life, that the next few weeks would be delicate, and that the thing she had set in motion was now larger than her, and needed space to move. She gave it space. What she didn't know, what she would learn only later, in pieces, from people who had been in rooms she wasn't in, was that her report had not landed in a vacuum. Lieutenant Colonel Maris had, it turned out, already received a separate concern about Briggs from a different source. A junior NCO named Corporal Walsh, who had privately noted to a senior NCO that Briggs's conduct during the rotation fell off, that something about the way he ran informal conversations in the unit felt designed to establish a very particular kind of pecking order. Walsh hadn't filed anything official. He had just said something quietly to someone, and that something had found its way to Maris through the kind of informal channel that formal reporting structures pretend don't exist, but actually run everything. Diana's report had confirmed what Walsh had sensed. Walsh's observation had given Diana's report a second witness point. Together, they made something that the Equal Opportunity Office couldn't file and move on from. The formal inquiry was opened on a Tuesday. Briggs was notified by Thursday. Diana heard about his notification through the particular electromagnetic field of base gossip that carries information at about 3 times the speed of official channels. She heard that he had laughed when they told him. A genuine laugh, not a nervous one. The laugh of a man who believed that the machinery of accountability was a thing that happened to other people. She heard that he had said something to the effect of, "Whoever filed this doesn't know how these things go." He was right that he knew how these things usually went. He was wrong about this one. Part of the reason he was wrong was the notebook. Diana's 11 pages of dated, specific, witness documentation was not the kind of material an inquiry board could dismiss on grounds of vagueness or miscommunication. It named people. It named times. It named exact words. It described a pattern across 14 months that could not be characterized as isolated incidents or misread tone. The EO investigating officer, a major named Cho, who had a reputation for going through a case like she was looking for load-bearing walls to pull out, spent 3 weeks interviewing witnesses. Most of them confirmed. Some of them, soldiers who had laughed at Briggs's comments in the moment, because that's what you do when the person laughing has rank on you, described the incidents with a clarity that suggested they had been waiting to be asked. The one that mattered most was the debrief. 12 soldiers had been there. 11 of them, when interviewed independently, described the school pickup line comment in consistent terms. Not dramatically, not with embellishment, just consistently, the kind of consistency that happens when people are describing something they actually saw rather than something they built a narrative around. Several of them used almost the same words to describe Diana's reaction. Asterisk, she didn't react. She just looked at him. I remember thinking she was going to say something. She didn't. Asterisk, Major Cho pulled those statements together and wrote something in her findings report that Diana would not read until months later, in a different context, in a sentence she would turn over in her head for years afterward. Cho wrote, Specialist Reyes's documented pattern of non-reaction appears to reflect a practiced professional discipline rather than indifference, suggesting a sustained and deliberate effort to maintain performance standards under conditions of repeated hostile conduct. Practice professional discipline. Diana liked that. She thought her mother would have liked it too. Meanwhile, Briggs was doing what men in his position often do when they realize the machinery is actually moving. He was talking. He was talking to people in his informal network, calling in small social debts, reminding people of favors, constructing the particular kind of ambient counter-narrative that doesn't make formal objections but tries to make the air around a case feel a certain way. He told people Diana was thin-skinned. He told people the rotation had been fine and she was taking one joke out of context. He told people he had 17 years of service and an unblemished record, and that this was exactly what people were afraid of, that you couldn't say anything anymore, that the army was becoming a place where a man couldn't lead without walking on eggshells. Some people nodded. Some people changed the subject. A few people, the ones he thought were with him, were already thinking about how they had answered Major Cho's questions and whether they had said the right things. None of this reached Diana, or rather, some version of it reached her, the distorted, second-hand version that travels through a base, but she let it pass through her without catching on anything. She had done what she came to do. She had told the truth in the right room. The rest was not her job. She went back to work. She ran PT in the mornings. She completed her assignments. She studied for her next certification. She ate in the mess hall at the same table she always ate at, and she did not avoid the spaces where Briggs moved through the base, because avoiding them would have meant organizing her life around him. And she had decided at some point between Thursday's exercise and Friday morning that she was done organizing her life around Leonard Briggs. He saw her once in the hallway outside the motor pool, and there was a moment, 2 seconds, maybe 3, where they were in each other's line of sight with nothing between them. She met his eyes. She did not look away first. He looked away first. She kept walking. It was a small thing. It happened in 2 seconds. Nobody saw it, but Diana carried it with her for a long time afterward, not as a victory, but as a marker. The moment she understood that the thing she had been told her whole life about underestimated people wasn't advice. It was physics. When you spend years absorbing and noting and recording and not reacting, when you do the quiet work that the people underestimating you don't believe you're doing, you accumulate something they can't see. And then one day the weight of it is visible, and they feel it, and they look away. That hallway moment. That was when she knew the inquiry wasn't going to end the way Briggs thought it was. She just didn't know yet how clearly she was right. Major Cho's findings report landed on Lieutenant Colonel Maris's desk on a Wednesday morning in January, 7 weeks after Diana had sat in the chair across from his desk with her notebook in her lap. It was 42 pages long. The findings were not ambiguous. The language was not diplomatic in the way that military documents sometimes are, careful and hedged, giving everyone a corridor to walk out through. It was precise. It named conduct. It named a pattern. It named 14 months. Maris read it in one sitting. That afternoon, he forwarded it up the chain with his own recommendation attached. Diana did not know any of this on Wednesday. She was running a vehicle maintenance check on the east side of the motor pool with 2 other soldiers, and the biggest problem in her morning was a coolant leak in a HMMWV that was resisting every fix they tried. She spent 40 minutes on it. She fixed it. She moved on to the next vehicle. The sun came up over the base the same way it always did, and the wind came off the Texas plain with that flat, wide-open coldness that she had stopped noticing about 6 months in, and it was a regular Wednesday, completely indistinguishable from every other Wednesday, and somewhere across the base in a building she wasn't in, her life was quietly, officially being changed. She found out on Friday, not from official channels. Those would come later, in the form of a brief, formal notification that she was not a party to the disciplinary proceedings, but that her report had been instrumental in their initiation. She found out on Friday the way most things on a military base are found out. Someone told someone who told someone who told Staff Sergeant Okafor, and Okafor found her after evening chow and said, with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something between stunned and quietly satisfied, "You hear about Briggs?" She said no. He said, "He's being recommended for separation." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Separation." Okafor nodded. He told her what he knew, which wasn't everything, but was enough, that the inquiry had found substantiated evidence of a pattern of discriminatory conduct, that additional complaint from other soldiers had surfaced during the investigation process, 2 of them from earlier postings that Briggs had managed to keep buried, and that the combination of the documented pattern and The prior conduct issues had moved this from a corrective action situation to a career-ending one. Other complaints. She hadn't known about those. She hadn't been trying to build a coalition. She had just told her own truth, in her own words, with her own 11 pages, and the truth had, apparently, been waiting to find other truths to join up with. Okafor looked at her carefully and said, "You okay?" She thought about it honestly, the way she tried to think about most things, not the way she was supposed to feel, not the way a person in a story is supposed to feel at this moment, but actually okay, actually what was true. She ran a quick internal check. Anger? No. Triumph? Not exactly. Something simpler. The feeling of a room that had been holding its breath, finally, breathing again. She said, "Yeah, I am okay." He nodded once. That was all. He didn't make a speech about it. She appreciated that. The formal notification came the following week. It confirmed what Okafor had heard. Sergeant First Class Leonard Briggs had been recommended for administrative separation under Army Regulation 635-200, with a determination of misconduct. The recommendation had been approved at the brigade level. He would be given the opportunity to request a board hearing, as was his right. Whether he did or not, his career in the United States Army was, for all practical purposes, over. 17 years. Gone. Not because of a formal complaint filed through proper channels after the first incident. Not because someone made noise or went to the press or called a congressman. Because one woman kept a notebook for 14 months. Because she was specific. Because she waited until she was clear. Because she walked up to a lieutenant colonel in a hallway and said 5 words. "I have something to report," with her back straight and her voice level and nothing in her face except a professional certainty that what she was about to say was true and important. 11 words, technically with the sir. That was the sentence. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Not the delivered line of a movie character who has been waiting for her moment. Just a soldier telling her commanding officer that something was wrong, in plain language, at the right time. That was the whole weapon. That was all of it. Briggs did request the board hearing. Diana learned this through the same channel she learned everything else. She also learned secondhand that the 2 prior complaints, both from female soldiers at earlier postings, both filed, both going nowhere at the time, had been officially reopened as part of the broader record. She thought about those women. She didn't know their names. She thought about them anyway. She thought about the particular loneliness of being the first one to say something and having it go nowhere, and how that loneliness doesn't disappear just because something eventually happens years later. She thought about that for a long time. The board upheld the recommendation. Briggs was separated from the Army in March. She was not there for that. She wasn't supposed to be, and she didn't want to be. She was on the day his separation was finalized, doing a land navigation exercise with 4 other soldiers in a field about 3 miles from the main post buildings, working a compass and a map, and the kind of concrete problem solving that she had always found grounding. Her team finished the exercise clean. She signed off on the results. She drank half a bottle of water and looked out at the flat line of the horizon and felt the wind, and then she turned around and went back to work. That was the whole ending. There was no ceremony for it. There was no announcement to the unit that the problem had been handled, that the right thing had happened, that justice had moved. The Army doesn't do that. The Army just moves on to the next thing, and the people in it are expected to move on too, and mostly they do because that is the culture, and Diana was of that culture. She moved on, but she carried something forward that she hadn't carried before, something she noticed in herself in the weeks that followed, a different quality of standing in a room. Not louder, not more aggressive, just more present in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be while Briggs was there, while she was absorbing and filing and performing non-reaction. She took up a little more space. Not a lot, just enough. Enough to be the size she actually was, without the constant small adjustment of making herself smaller so as not to give someone like Briggs something to react to. She hadn't realized how much energy that adjustment had cost her until she stopped making it. In April, she was recommended for a leadership development track by Lieutenant Colonel Maris. The recommendation used language she recognized from Major Cho's report, She had been shown a partial summary by then, and it spoke to her professional conduct, her documentation practices, her performance under sustained adverse conditions. It was, in the careful language of official military documents, a glowing record. She accepted the track. She told her father on a Sunday phone call, the kind they had every week, the same time, the same ritual, him asking how she was eating, and her telling him fine, and them eventually getting to the real conversation underneath the check-in. She told him about the leadership track. She didn't tell him about Briggs, not the full story, not yet. She told him she'd had a hard few months, and they were over now, and she was moving up. There was a pause on the line. Her father said, "Did you let them underestimate you?" She smiled. She said, "Yeah, Dad, I let them." He said, "Good girl." It was not the most complicated thing anyone had ever said to her. It was not the most articulate acknowledgement of what she had been through. But he said it in the exact tone he had used when she was 9 years old, and telling her something that he believed was physics, a law of the world, observable and reliable, proven over and over by people who understood its value. She held the phone in both hands after they hung up. She thought about the school pickup line comment and the way Briggs had looked after he made it, that particular look of a man who has confirmed what he already believed about the world. She thought about the notebook. She thought about 11 words in a hallway, spoken without performance, without anger, without anything except the clean intention to tell the truth. She thought about the 2 women she didn't know, whose names she would never know, who had said something first and had it go nowhere, and who had planted something anyway, a record, a precedent, a thread that had eventually connected to her thread, because truth has a way of finding other truth if you give it enough time. She thought about what her father said about underestimated people, the most dangerous kind. Leonard Briggs had 17 years. He had rank, experience, a network, the benefit of the doubt that institutions extend to people who look and sound like him. He had all of the obvious advantages. He had walked into that unit with all of them stacked in his favor. Diana Reyes had a notebook and a clear head and a sentence. And she had been watching. That is the thing about people who have been underestimated their whole lives. They get very good at watching. They get very good at remembering. They get very good at waiting for the right door and walking through it at the right pace and saying exactly what needs to be said without a single wasted word. Briggs had laughed. She had watched him laugh. She had written it down. That is where his career ended. Not with the sentence she spoke in the hallway. Not with the board hearing. Not with the signed paperwork. Not with whatever conversation happened in whatever room she was never in. It ended the moment he laughed in front of 12 witnesses at a woman who had already been watching him for 14 months and who had long since stopped being afraid of him and was simply patiently waiting for him to hand her what she needed. He handed it over freely. He thought he was winning. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a lot of things, but mostly he was wrong about her.